Hello, everybody. Welcome into Perspectives. Our guest today is Jarrod Kopp, who's with Theater Tulsa. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, listen, I'm going to pick your brain.
Okay.
First of all, pardon me, congratulations on being 100 years old.
Thank you. I look younger than I actually am. Oh, you mean the theater company?
There you go.
Yes, the Theater Tulsa is now celebrating its 100th consecutive season in Tulsa.
Take us back. How did it start?
Well, it started back in 1922 when a couple of women who had moved here from Boston, they were oil, millionaire wives, and their husbands brought them to the oil capital of the world, and they looked around and went, where's the art? Where's the theater? And so they decided that Tulsa needed a theater company of its own, and that was the start of Theater Tulsa, or as it was known back then, Tulsa Little Theater.
Has a book been written about the company?
No, not really. There never has been, which is interesting because it's kind of, the whole history is ripe for a retelling at some point.
I've got a feeling there's more to the company than just a ghost light.
Well, yes. Theater Tulsa has not had a smooth 100 years. It's had its ups and downs. It's had its near-death experiences a couple of times. But, the company has managed to survive, World War II and the Great Depression, and most recently a global pandemic, which I was, on board for at the time. And it's still kicking, which is something that we're very proud of, that this is a theater company that just has a lot of resilience to it.
Do you function as strictly an administrator, or do you also become involved in production?
I do become involved in production. So I'm the executive director, which means I'm basically the producer, and I handle the business side of a lot of what goes on.
Sure.
We have an artistic director who's kind of our quality control and helps me with the programming of the season. But I have been known to dabble in directing about once per year. I'm currently directing our production of Little Shop of Horrors, which opens in October.
Feed me some more.
Yes. And as we were coming out of the pandemic, we had a couple of times when we were working in understudies and swings so that people could, if someone got sick with COVID and they had to step out for a week of quarantine, we could have someone step in. Well, we had two instances in shows this past season where both the actor and the understudy had tested positive for COVID, and they were out, and I was literally going on stage for a couple of performances with a script in my hand and doing the part, mostly because the costume fit me as well.
Are there pictures?
Yes, there are. One of them is in Sound of Music. I played Herr Zeller in the opening weekend of Sound of Music because that actor was sick with COVID, and so it's pictures of me in like a black trench coat and a Nazi swastika. I'd rather that picture not go public.
I hope you're keeping a scrapbook.
I am. Yeah, of course I do.
Where are you headed?
Well, as a theater company, we're taking this year as kind of a victory lap, half a victory lap and half a vision for the future. And so what you're seeing this year with our 10 productions is some of our shows are more of the traditional big musicals that people have come to associate with Theater Tulsa. But among those, we're doing some extra twists to some old classics. Same thing with our plays. We're doing something that's very contemporary and new, and something that's very old and traditional classic. And I can go into more depth with those if you like.
Sure, go right ahead.
Well, for instance, we opened this season with Something Rotten, which is a fairly new title. It came out in August. And that's a story of some guys who were competing with Shakespeare in the Renaissance era, and they create the first musical, which happens to be an American-style musical. It's a lot of anachronisms in the show, but it's a really broad comedy about all of these, and they insert all of these musical references that they don't understand in their first musical, which is they're trying to copy Hamlet, and they come up with Omelette the musical. But that was a really smart move for us because it references a whole lot of shows that we've been doing over the past, decades, and that people could really enjoy. I'm doing Little Shop of Horrors right now with a primarily people of color in the cast. That's a show that's always been very racially defined, where the white actors play Seymour and Audrey and the dentist and Mushnick, and the black actors are playing side characters like Audrey's voice and all that. And we blew all that away and just said, we're just going to cast primarily African-American and Latino people in these roles and see what kind of perspective we get from that. Wow. We're doing 1776 in January, and we're actually telling the story of declaring independence from England with all women as the founding fathers. So we're doing a whole piece on as if the men were never in charge. What would the women's perspective be like on that? And then we're ending with Kinky Boots, which is another new title about, it features a lot of drag queens and about accepting yourself and who you are. So there's a little mix of the kind of musicals that we have used to do with new titles, with new twists, that we're just kind of putting out there to show people that yes, we're taking a nod at our previous seasons and what you liked before, but we're also putting some twists in to say, this is kind of the direction we're going now. There's going to be a lot more surprises in the future in our programming.
Okay, you've managed to whet the appetite.
Okay.
How much of if I say scrapbook, it's going to sound wrong, but I've got to ask the question, how much of a scrapbook have you guys put together?
We have archives of pretty much every season since we started, from the 20s. In our files.
You've got to be kidding me.
No,
That's 100
programs,
years.
ads, old photos. Sometimes they're on, as they get later, they're on film negatives, later on CDs and all of that. I'm actually in talks with the museum about taking over those archives and curating them because they're just kind of sitting here and they're good for our reference, but I'd like them to be made publicly available if possible.
Well, I was going to say, what you're describing to me is the ideal documentary.
It kind of is, yes. Are you interested in doing a documentary?
I've done them before. I could do it.
I would kind of love that.
We would kind of talk about it.
Okay.
Let's see what we can come up with.
Okay, that's great.
Fantastic. You know, I have a nasty habit of asking people, and you're going to know what it is right off the top. When I mention a ghost light, you'd be surprised how many people involved in the arts have no idea what I'm talking about.
Right.
But even Kane's Ballroom has a ghost light. Everywhere you go, there's a ghost light.
Right.
Can you give us the background of the ghost light?
Well, the ghost light has an actual function, which is that when the stage is dark, you put a light in the center of the stage so that no one trips on wires or falls into the pit or anything like that. And that's that functionality has just become a tradition now that when you have a theater and it's dark for the night or the day or the night, you put a light in there, partly for safety, but partly because that's just kind of a tradition, like not saying Scottish play in a theater, the title of the Scottish play.
You know, there has long been a rumor about theater. Not saying your theater or your cast or your company, but there's long been a rumor that regardless of where you perform, there are spirits around you.
That is a classic rumor, yes.
There are roles played that those spirits come back to watch what you do now to see if you carry on the tradition in the way you should. Do you believe in that?
Well, I will say this. We had a space with our costume shop and scene shop for many, many years on Main Street, which is next to what's called the Tavern now in downtown Tulsa. It's now a bakery. But many people over several decades reported mysterious things happening. Noises happening in the scene shop that they couldn't explain, something moving where they thought it should be and now it's over here. And so there are a lot of ghost stories about that space in particular. But it's interesting that you bring this up, the story of spirits in stories, because that's actually a premise of the play that we are premiering. We're doing a world premiere of this weekend, which is Twisted Shakes. Now that is part of our adventure series, where we're taking new works that are not designed to be performed in a traditional theater setting and putting them somewhere else. And we're basically co-producing that with other artists and theater companies. This is a collaboration between Theater Tulsa, Blackjack Rewrite Company, and AHA Tulsa, the Arts and Humanities Council. And that's a story of Shakespearean characters who are released by Puck, mischievous Puck, and they're brought into today's world, and they decide, I'm sick of being played by these actors over and over again telling the same story of my life. I want a new life. Especially the women who ended up dying at the end or losing their love, they come together and form a little union and say, we're not going back. And that's actually premiering tonight, Thursday night, and it's happening Friday and Saturday as well, this entire weekend.
You know, it goes without saying that there are young ones out there who would thoroughly enjoy being involved in theater, and they don't know how to to get there. They don't know what to do. Is there a way that your company can help?
Yes, we have a rich volunteer base, and I would encourage people to check out our website and look for those opportunities. There's a place called with TT where we have solicitations for artists and designers, as well as volunteers. People who have no idea what it's like to work for theater will find that there's a place for them. And that may be on a crew. There's jobs as simple as moving things from one place to the other, up to seamstresses, to sound engineers, up to performers. And there's plenty of people who think that, oh, I could never get on stage until they actually do it. And then it's amazing. And I always love when I see someone in an audition room for the first time who comes through and say, yeah, I thought I'd try it. I've always wanted to try. And that's usually someone who I want to cast because I want to get them in and have that experience.
Kind of the, ooh, fresh meat.
That too, but it's also a fresh opportunity.
Yeah. I hear you. We got a minute and a half. Help me understand what I can do from my vantage point to help encourage young ones to your vantage point. How do I get them to become involved?
I would say if you're talking about convincing young people to get involved in theater, the easiest thing is bring them to a show and see what we have. We have high quality shows. We like to, our premise is that we try to put a certain quality on everything that we do. And that means we try to operate as a professional level theater in terms of our processes and how we treat people, but we're obviously not because we're using volunteer actors and performers, but we try to treat them with the same dignity and respect that you would get if you were to be, performing on Broadway with a union, And so I would say, come see our shows, get involved, come volunteer. We always accept donations as well, but if you want to give of your time, that's always a valuable asset for us as well.
Well, and it's interesting too to note, I know for a fact we have a number of former Broadway theater people living quietly here in Tulsa. They're retired, and they've just reached a point where they said, we're going to be quiet about it. I wish there were a way to turn these folk into involved participants in your organization.
I do too, and actually that happens more frequently you would think. There's a lot of people who either may not have necessarily performed on Broadway, but they studied theater, they went off and performed for years in Chicago, maybe at the Steppenwolf, or in New York at smaller theaters. I know some who have done cruises or in LA, and they decided to come back and start a family and put their roots down in Oklahoma where they came from, and they have all this training and all these skills, and they bring them to us, and it's amazing.
Jarrod, we're out of time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I could talk about this all day, but I won't.
Well, we'll get you back because there's some more I want to ask you about and some more you need to talk about. Thank you again.
All right, thank you, Sam.
Short break. We'll be back with more right after this.